Hi, my name is Pete Duffy. I was born up in the north side of Cork City. I can remember in my growing up years, on the road where I lived, most every house in the surrounding area was occupied by people who had moved up from the flat of the city, from a place in the middle parish called Broad Lane, just off the North Main Street, where the entrance to St. Francis Church now stands. As a matter of fact, the church was always referred to by the older generation as the Broad Lane Church. The people on my street, up in the north side, they seem to be living in a time warp. They were forever being drawn back to the Broad Lane area, in mind and body. To go to Mass on a Sunday, they would still go down, all the way down to the Broad Lane Church. And most of the men still would only go down to drink in their old local pubs in the North Main Street. So 'twas no wonder my head was so full of stories of the happenings about the lane as a small boy, listening to all the old Charlies who used to take great pleasure in reliving the old memories. My only problem in narrating memories of Broad Lane was resurrecting all those tales from the cobweb-covered archives of my mind. Now, don't forget, you have to listen to the song at the end of the story. Thank you very much. Pete Duffy.
The messenger boy was leaning on his bike that was parked in Broad Lane. He was taking a quick breather. The load he had delivered all over Cork that afternoon had nearly been the death of him. It was a horse that should be pulling this bike, he thought to himself. She was a monster altogether, always in danger of falling over when she was fully loaded. He sucked hard on the remnants of the woodbine butt that he had been saving in his top pocket, getting the last hint of life out of it before spitting it onto the ground. He'd stopped off at his aunt's, who was living in the lane, for a cup of tea. Now he was just killing time before heading back to the English market. He'd have to clean the stall for about 2 hours and then be finished for the day, or so he hoped. He crossed his fingers to make it happen. They could always catch him for a last-minute delivery up to some place like the top of Patrick's Hill. On your way home, they'd say, and he living in Broad Lane. They'd always get the last pound of flesh out of him. Getting dark already, being a November winter's evening, the rain clouds overhead. The lamplighter was going round with his long pole, putting the flame to the gas to brighten up the area. Workers were starting to come home after a hard day's graft. A lot of the men from the lane were labourers or dockers who tried to get a quick pint of porter in the local before going home for the dinner. But for some, 1 pint was never enough. The washing that had been put out all day in the faint hope that it might be dry after hanging from the windows, makeshift lines and any other place that could be found, had already been taken in, and the aromatic smell of food being cooked dominated the air, as children still played games trying to get the last bit of enjoyment over the rapidly darkening day, to the sound of the sing-song that was heard from the corner pub, already started by the early evening drinkers. The boy was coming up the stairs of 30 in Broad Lane, a young snip of a lad holding the small brown paper bag of tobacco that his mother had sent him out to buy in North Main Street. Her clay pipe was down to dragging in air, and she was gasping for a smoke to calm her nerves. Standing in the doorway, her shawl still hanging around her shoulders to stay warm, she took the bag from the young lad, broke off a piece from the rope of tobacco, stuffed it into the clay pipe, and went into the room to get a light from the fire. She was still full of excitement. Impatiently, She had waited for her son to come home from school. The postman had delivered a letter that afternoon, and with a British military postmark on it, she knew 'twas from her husband, Fox Sullivan, all the way out in India. The mother was illiterate. All her life couldn't read nor write, although she never had a problem counting, especially when money was involved. She sat the boy down to the table, pouring him tea from the teapot into the tin mug, and then from the mug into a saucer to cool the tea, on account of having no milk in the house. And also a thick slice of brown bread she'd made fresh that day, with a skim of butter and potato on it. His dinner. "Get that into you," she said, putting the paraffin oil lamp on the table to give him more light. "I want you to read me Fox's letter, boy." Touching the lad affectionately on the head, she went over and stoked the fire to get more heat into the room, and sucked in the warm tobacco from her pipe to warm her and calm her insides. The lad had already taken the letter from the envelope, ignoring the food for the present. He was now also overexcited. "Just tell me the important bits," she said to her son, who was top of his class in school and good at the reading. She had 8 in family, 4 boys and 4 girls, nearly all in their teens. Now after a couple of minutes, the lad looked up at his mother, a broad smile on his young face. "Dad says he's leaving the army, coming home for good in 2 months' time. He says he's missing us all." Ma Sullivan wiped the tears that had started to run channels down her face. "Fox is coming home for good. Fox is coming home for good," she repeated to herself as she came over and hugged her son. "Holy Mother of Christ," she said, as if praying, "I was beginning to think 'twould never happen. I'd never see this day." For a lot of the time, many of the women in Broad Lane played the role of husband and wife. Cause with not an awful lot of work to be found in Cork City, many of the men signed up for the British Army, where the money was much better and well needed if you had a growing family, and served on foreign shores. In any case, Cork seemed to have become a loyalist city. For a long time now, people just getting on with their lives, living in harmony. Broad Lane was a small community in itself, just off the North Main Street, running alongside St. Francis Church, or as it was locally called, the Broad Lane Church, and coming out on Grattan Street, full of tenements where countless generations of Cork families were reared. Many women from the lane, out of necessity, tried to make money by running some small business or other, like collecting cast-off clothes from the rich houses up in Mountainotty or down in Blackrock, where the big knobs lived, and selling them off at 100% profit in the cold care. Selling fish and periwinkles in the North Main Street, or fruit and veg, bought cheaply from the farmers out in the countryside with the hope of making a quick profit. Ma Sullivan used to swag ice cream in a container and travel the abandoned train with one of her children, selling to the passengers, but she could only carry so much and 'twould be sold in no time at all. And she had a spot in the cold care where she'd sell now and then. Sure, everyone was trying to make an extra shilling in any way they could. One man from the lane used to repair bicycles in his front room of his house. It was a clutter of bicycle parts, but it was a good trade, cause at that time the bike was the mode of transport, if you were lucky to have one, cause a car was only for the rich. Anyway, the 2 months flew by, and in no time at all, John Fox Sullivan was home after leaving the Munsters with 20 years service in one place or another and a chest full of medals to his name. He arrived in a brand new dark suit, walking with his cocky stride, his kit bag thrown over his shoulders, and the boots that you could see a reflection in. He always walked tall and as straight as a lamppost since he signed up for the Munsters. Looking a fine figure of a man, he walked into Broad Lane, filling out the new suit, and his head of flaming foxy hair, which had gained him the nickname when he was a wild youngster. Fox had been the one who captured the notorious Witcher Goon out in that part of India, an old wizened hag of a woman in rags and covered in filth, who was stealing babies in the dark of night, offering them up to some weird god and then eating them. The British dragged her through the streets on a length of rope, so the natives could see that the witch was captured, and tied her to a pole in the middle of the square, where the population, in a vengeful frenzy, stoned her to death and then set her alight to banish the evil spirit. Fox was rewarded by the city mayor. Asked what did he want? "A new suit," answered Fox. "Any colour once is black." So a dark new suit was made by the army tailor from the best officer's material that would see many years of wear when he was back in Civvy Street. And from now on, the suit would be kept in a large wardrobe with the mirrors on the front, covered with a grandfather shirt in case of dust, and taken out only on special occasions. Ma Sullivan would see personally to that. Fox swept his wife up in his arms. She was so excited to have her man back home, she was laughing tears. Fox would be on the reserve list from now on, and that's the way it would stay if Ma Sullivan had any say in the matter. There was a big treat on the table for Fox. No expense had been spared. His favourite, a double helping of tripe and dressine in the biggest plate that could be borrowed from the neighbours, and after that 4-pint bottles of Beamish porter to wash it down. This was a big effort from Ma Sullivan, being that tea and bread was the stable diet most of the time for the people of the lane. Fox looked at the feast like a man who hadn't eaten for a year. He kissed his wife on the side of the face. Life couldn't get any better than this, he thought to himself. Broad Lane kept on being a hive of activity. The family who had the rights to the rent in the lane lived in the first house on the entrance near Grattan Street, just across from the pub. So you had to be on the ball when they came to collect. Not much chance in pulling off a bluff there. 'Twas a back-breaking job trying to carry anything up the narrow stairways to the people who occupied the attic rooms. The walls were never painted. What would be the use? There was always track marks on them from years of use. In the alley off the lane, there'd be a market every month. Traders who come over from London with all sorts of goods. The square where the market was held got its name from the houses nearby, because it seemed all the families living there had the same name. They were all related to each other. One family in Broad Lane were well known for their wood turning, craftsmen who made beautiful hurleys for the local teams. In many of the houses, out in the window, bird cages would be hanging from the hooks. Linnets, finches, and then Fox pride and joy, his 3 canaries. He could spend hours talking to him, listening to him sing. There was always great competition among the bird fanciers in the lane to see who had the best singer. Then the census man would come around after a period of years to make a list of who was living in the lane. Many kept this list on the back of the door because old habits die hard, and it always seems as if families were growing at a fierce rate. After taking things easy since he arrived home, when he looked for permanent work, Fox was finding it hard to find a job. On and off, he was doing part-time work for a pest controller in the city, where he sometimes had to walk the tunnel that ran from the railway station all the way to St. Finbarr's Cathedral under Cork City, trying to keep the rat population down, but at least he had his army pension to subsidise him. He was starting to get under Ma Sullivan's feet, being around the house, cause it seems citations and a chest full of medals stood for nothing now that he was back in Civvy Street. In any case, dock work or labouring were your only options. Something drastic was called for. Ma Sullivan used pull. Her brother could help. He was a foreman on the docks. She didn't want to give Fox any excuses to sign up again, take off to the other side of the world. Her brother got him a job helping on a horse and cart, bringing coal from the boats to the warehouse. And in no time at all, he was settling into the way of things. And he could even be found with the other men from the lane, drinking in the corner pub, and his face still covered with coal dust. After a time, the novelty of having their father around was soon lost on the children. They were getting on with their own lives, growing up too fast for Fox's liking. You see, Fox was trying to make up for lost time, but he found a slight distance there. The children, in any case, they were closer to their mother. She was the one who had always been around. So he felt cheated. He'd missed so much by being away, and on top of that, time was moving too fast, where he wanted it to stand still. A lot of the time now, there was only himself and Ma Sullivan in the house, and the silence was deafening. This was the routine he fell into. It was the woman over the house who was the real boss, so Fox, who had been used to taking orders all his life, just let it be. And still the hands of the clock moved at an unreal speed. Till all of a sudden, one of the daughters got married. She was already with child. It was a big party in number 13 Broad Lane. Everyone contributed, giving a loan of chairs, cups and saucers and anything that might be needed. That was the way of things back then. Neighbours coming together to help out. Being such a close community in Broad Lane, no one ever really closed their doors. There seemed to be a code of honour back then. In any case, what was there to steal? Another thing, the room next door to you, it could be housing your relatives. Getting down to the plain truth of it, 'twas a time of trust. After that, wedding came along, till all the boys and the girls in the Sullivan family were married. Except for the one son who died young from TB, after being in bad health all his life. But as the old saying goes, one door closes and another one opens, 'cause all of a sudden, grandchildren seem to be always in the house, and they just love being around their grandparents. Fox was in his element. He'd be forever telling them stories about his travels and going around the floor giving them spins on his back. Even one child got crabbing enough could be trusted to go out for grandma's pipe tobacco in the North Main Street. Fox had even roped the young lad into shining his boots, teaching him the old spit and polish trick that only the army men knew back then. With the result that the young lad became so conscientious he was doing a better job than Fox could ever do, and he was rewarded with a large brown penny to buy a paper bag of broken candy, which was locally known as brust. And to top it all, he had a head of Foxy hair. Ma Sullivan wasn't selling in the Cork anymore. One of her daughters was doing that now, and she was a chip off the old block at the Dealing. But the old woman still loved to wander around. She had loads of friends, and they'd sit around in a group, a bunch of old Shawleys, eating crew beans sold by the young Catty Barry with their own special flavour after being cooked in the 45-gallon drum, smoking their pipes or having a pinch of snuff, and drinking tea with a small drop of paddy thrown in. Fox had found it hard to work in the docks, so too much for him now, and in any case old age was catching up with him. He had a lot of boards now, and they needed his personal attention, so he said, and he always had a pension to back him up. Life was still all hustle and bustle in the lane. On one occasion, the drovers were running an extra load of sheep from a farm up on the top of Fair Hill down the North Main Street, and the place was in a terrible state. The sheep fouling everywhere. Some of the sheep strayed into the broad lane and up the stairs of number 13, and they had a terrible time trying to get them out again. The smell was woeful, and you'd have to be careful where you walk, you could slip. 'Twas said one of the sheep got lost somewhere up in number 13, but Fox swore blindly that was a blasted total exaggeration, not a grain of truth in it. And this from a man who never told a lie in all his life. Then on the other hand, 'twas said that the Sullivans of number 13 Broad Lane were eating meat for their dinner for weeks after that event. Then 'twas a great occasion. Michael Collins came into the lane, the big fella himself, and everyone trying to get near him to shake his hand. The press were everywhere, took loads of photos outside St. Francis Church, and the big knobs everywhere trying to get in on the act. But as the old saying goes, nothing is forever, and life was about to change for the people of Broad Lane in the city of Cork, in the southern corner of Ireland, and life as they knew it would never ever be the same again. The new, larger St. Francis Church that was to be built needed more space, and the houses in the lane that had stood for hundreds of years and had seen many generations of Cork people live in them were to be levelled to the ground and its history turned to dust. Many people from the lane were to be moved to the new housing complex up in the north side called Grana that had been christened the Red City on account of the red tiles on the roofs of the houses. The dreaded letter came to the grandparents, and this at a time of their lives when they should be taking things easy. In the letter they were informed that they were to be moved to a new house up in a place called Mount Nebo, and they weren't too happy. Being on the flat of the city all their lives, and all you had to do was go out the door and everything was nearby. Too many blasted hills up there, said Fox. But they couldn't stay in the lane, to soon be gone. And one daughter was already gone up there to the same area with her young family. So like it or not, they reluctantly put on a brave face and tried to make a go of it. The problem was the grandmother had gathered a lot of furniture and other belongings over the years, and most of that had to be moved. Back then, transport was what you could put your hands on. Boxcar, pram, bike, and the small stuff put into boxes, bags and pillowcases, all to be carried anywhere you could. But the grandmother's pride and joy was her large wardrobe with the mirrors covering the front. A wedding present from her mother. How was she going to get this up to the north side? "Leave the blasted thing here," said Fox, one night when he was well oiled after having too much drink taken. There was almost a stand-up fight. The old woman stood in front of him, hands on hips, fire and brimstone in her eyes. "That wardrobe is going up to Mount Nebo, or I'm not going," said the grandmother. Then, to get the extra last word in, like all women try to do when their tempers are up, she said, "I tell you what we'll do, Fox Sullivan." She only added the Sullivan part to his name when she was real angry. "Maybe we should leave your darling canaries here as well, twisting the knife like." She's hit the soft spot in Fox. Them birds were his pride and joy, his babies. No one ever were left mess with him or criticise him. He was going to carry the cages up the north side himself, with newspaper covering them, and he'd take every precaution, make sure there'd be no sudden shocks to frighten the birds. He was also prepared to walk up the North Main Street, up the rock steps, all the way up Blarney Street, up Barras Buildings, and on up to Mount Nebo, even though he considered it a harder climb than the spying cop out there in Africa, and to him, Monk Nebo was way out in the bogs of the country. Grandma had really offended him this time. What's more, he felt his boards had been offended. So he got up in a flaming huff, grabbed his cap from the nail behind the door, and headed off to the corner pub where he was among his own cronies and other board fanciers, leaving his wife exasperated, shouting after him as he went down the stairs about all the years the wardrobe had kept his suit from getting dirty. In reality, the old people were really angry at the situation they found themselves in, having to move at this stage of their lives. They felt left down and helpless, and on top of that, the powers that be didn't seem to be one bit concerned about what the old people's feelings in Broad Lane were. The pen pushers only saw it as progress. A man called Lofty from the Blackpool area, he was under 5 feet tall, who used to sell timber blocks for the fire from his donkey and cart. He was persuaded to take the wardrobe up to the north side. His cart was usually overflowing, and he'd only be finished when all the firewood was sold. At that stage, the poor old donkey was ready to drop from all the heavy pulling. So, one of the grandsons and his son-in-law called Paddy were roped in to help with the moving. But he had to wait till late in the afternoon for Lofty to get started. Down the North Main Street came the 3 boyos, sitting up in the cart with the donkey going at his own slow pace, till they stopped in the lane. Grandmother Sullivan was there in her shawl and her grey hair tied back with a piece of string, and she dragging hard on the clay pipe. The old woman still had the heart of a lion. Even after giving birth to 8 children, she was still the boss. Even Fox was half afraid of her at this stage of his life, and him after being a sergeant in the British Army. So 'twas Grandma, the real boss, who took responsibility to oversee the whole operation. She felt they'd all be looking at her to give instructions as to how the wardrobe was to be carried down the stairs and loaded onto the cart. Fox was useless in them kind of situations. The houses in Broad Lane at the time were 4-storey tenements with narrow stairways, and a lot could happen to a wardrobe if it wasn't carried carefully. Fox kept getting in the way. The house was in a terrible state. Even though they lived in only 2 rooms, they still called it a house. But with all the stuff packed away in bags and boxes, Grandpa Fox, he knew where to sit down. Even the boards seemed kind of agitated. In the end, he jumped up, grabbed his cap from the nail behind the door, and said he was too old for this kind of carry-on. So he went off to his second home, the pub. How to get the wardrobe up onto the cart was causing a problem. The donkey wasn't happy. He kept looking back to see what was happening. Grandma said, "Don't ye scratch that wardrobe or I'll kill the 3 of ye and the donkey as well." So 'twas decided to stand the wardrobe up straight, with the 2 lads holding the ropes that were going over the top to hold it from falling out onto the road. Blankets and pillows from the bed and old coats were laid on the floor of the cart as a precaution. Grandma Sullivan stood there in her shawl, hands on her hips. Everybody in the lane stood along watching, waiting for something to happen, just like a circus. A few of the wise lads on the corner made a few witty remarks, but Grandma shut them up fairly fast, this being of a time when the elderly were shown respect. The whole thing started to move over the lane and up the North Main Street, with the donkey stopping and going because of the unfamiliar load in the back. "Will you keep that feckin' donkey steady?" said Paddy. "I do my best." "She's very nervous," says Lofty. People were stopping and looking at him. Few of the hardy lads were whistling and shouting in their direction. Paddy was turning red. He was ready to jump down and take him on, but Lofty convinced him to keep a cool head. Cursing to himself, Lofty was thinking, was this worth all the hassle? Then he was thinking about the points and the short ones. He'd been drinking up in John's, the top of Blackpool, and he felt a small bit better. Scratching the week's growth of beard on his face, he went back to keeping the donkey cool. "That's a good girl now, Sally. Everything is grand now, girl." And on they went, over the Norquay Bridge and up to the end of Shannon Street. This is a very old part of Cork City. This area was a small city in itself. Many types of business were dominant here, and it was all because of the butter market. That sent its butter all over the world. Over the years, one of the main forms of transport was the horse and cart. Shandon Street, being one of the main routes, was paved in cobblestones to give the horses more grip. But the stones tended to get slippery when they got wet. So after leaving the flat of the city, this was where it would be a hard climb. Lofty the driver knew it, and the lads on the cart would have to come to the front to balance it. So Lofty told them so. Then something happened as the lads moved to the front of the cart, tilting the wardrobe at a new angle. At the junction of Blarney Street, near the Triangular Park. The donkey looks back for the 100th time, and this time there was another donkey looking back at him from the reflection in the mirror. He stopped dead on the spot, and he wouldn't move for all the tea in China. He started roaring and kicking like mad. "He break the feckin' wardrobe," says the grandson. At the same time, people stopped and gathered around, having a great laugh. One wise ass on the sidewalk shouts, "This is better than a circus, boy," and got a great laugh from the crowd. Something had to be done, and done fast. The donkey was taken out from between the cart and coaxed up Shannon Street by Lofty, who kept talking in her ear. The two lads manhandled the cart up after him, with the help of some of the passer-boys, and the wardrobe swaying like a drunk as they went over the cobblestones. Everything was put back together on the top of Shannon Street. A couple of coats were thrown over the wardrobe mirror, and the donkey settled down after being bribed by Lofty with a fistful of sugar. And the whole circus moved up Cathedral Road to Mount Nebo without any more hassle. The north side was a culture shock for the grandparents. Back in Broad Lane, they had just two small rooms. The toilet and the water tap, 'twas outdoors, for everyone to use, and always some of the neighbours would be around to share the local gossip. In hail, rain or snow, Fox was stripped to the waist and washed from the tap like the old soldier he was. But now they had a whole house to themselves, and everything was indoors. They put the bed and the wardrobe in the living room on the ground floor, with Fox's suit still in it. Having easy access to the kitchen and the toilet, they left the rest of the house empty. They tried to make a go of it. Fox had a job as a watchman for a while at the top of Barraspillins, wearing an old army grey coat, sitting in his sentry-like watchman's hut, forever nodding off, sleeping half the night, sipping warm tea from the billy can with a drop of whiskey in it to ward off the shivers from the malaria he'd been infected with from his time in India. Grandma Sullivan used to visit her daughter, who lived in the next terrace, using the neighbour's back garden as a shortcut. And sometimes she'd stay the night when Fox was doing his watchman's job. But life wasn't the same for the two very old people who had spent all their lives on the flat of the city. If Fox wanted to go out for a pint, he had to go all the way down the steep hill to a pub in Blarney Street. And 'twould be a long hard slog for him to come back up. And then on top of that, Fox's birds stopped singing. They missed the lane and the familiar sounds. So if the truth be known, after living up in Mount Nebo for just 5 months, where they found it hard to stay awake from all the fresh air, and aches in their bones from all the hills, the two old people couldn't take it anymore. Grandma Sullivan fell in bad health. She missed the lane. She missed the company of the old neighbours. She missed the sounds that come in a big tenement house where they had to lay the mattress on the floor at night for sleeping on and take it up again in the morning to lay the table for eating. She missed going out the door, and in 2 minutes she'd be wandering through the stalls in the coal quay, talking to all her old friends. She missed all that and more. A black depression developed in her mind, and she would cry in the night in her bed. Gone was the strong woman who hadn't been afraid of anything that life could throw at her, and she became just a shell of the woman she once had been. And the sorrow and the sadness was in her 24 hours a day. Fox tried to do his best to pull her out of this, filling her clay pipe with tobacco, only for it to be left untouched by the side of her bed. Fox himself was also starting to become feeble, so they moved back down to the middle parish, where they should never have been forced to leave in the first place, to live in one room. And a wardrobe was given to the daughter, who still lived up in the north side, and Fox had to part with his beloved canaries. The grandparents didn't last long after that. Grandma Sullivan went first. Maybe she had really died the day she left Broad Lane, who knows? Fox lived on in the one room, still to be recognised by his head of foxy hair, drawing his pension from the post office in the North Main Street. A lonely man and a martyr who spent all his pension on drink. After pawning his medals from 20 years and 3 campaigns in the British Army, he didn't care much about anything. He still tried to move around at a snail's pace, bent over now and his body weak from old age, and not really caring about anything anymore. Although he was still making the effort to shine his boots, and he couldn't understand why. 'Twas something subconscious from his past, his army days. Or maybe at that stage 'twas something that gave him comfort, his own personal worry beads. Who knows? He could be found going through the old lanes of the marsh area, touching the old walls, just like someone in a trance, looking but not seeing. He went back to look at Broad Lane once, and he stood there, cap pressed down on his head, leaning on his old blackthorn stick, and a week's growth of beard on his face, crying out for a razor, and the butt of a woodbine hanging from the corner of his mouth unlit. Bent over with weariness, arthritis, and the shivers from the old malaria that had ravaged his body and mind, a far throw now from the military code he had lived by all his life, ramrod straight, clean, and groomed to perfection. And the bull roar of his voice that had frightened the living daylights out of the new recruits, all that was left of that now was just a horsey, inaudible whisper. And now all he saw was a load of rubble. 'Twas the last straw, and it broke his heart. Shaking like someone in a fit, the heavy tears of a great loss started to run down his face, and he left a broken man. His Broad Lane was gone, where his children had grown up, where his parents and grandparents before them had lived, and where his cousin, a quiet, innocent, retarded young lad called Danzo Sullivan, who had been conned into hiding guns for the boys who were on the run, had been dragged out of his house by the British, shot there in the middle of the lane, his mother tearing her hair out and pleading for mercy. 'Twas all gone now. Was obeying the Union in the end, for John Fox Sullivan, broken-hearted and living with his memories. He went to a place where no one could reach him, not even his own children, a twilight world between life and death. So he just faded away into the land where every one of us are destined for. And in the end, the only thing that was left of the two grandparents and all those memories of a place called Broad Lane was a large wardrobe with mirrors on the front that I looked at myself in from the time I could walk, growing up in the north side of Cork City.
Now me mother's name was Kitty, came from the town of Cork, from a place just off the North Main Street that long ago's been knocked. Before she took me father's hand, Sullivan was her name. She was known as Kitty, who came from old Broad Lane. Now Cork, it was a busy place back in 24. People trying to earn a bob, keep hunger from the door. Like her sisters and her brothers, me mother had to work, find a way to make a life in the dear old town of Cork. In Patrick Street you can hear the trams travel through the rain, as Father Matthew's statue try to help us to abstain. But the greatest joy in being alive, I heard me mother say, was the happy sound of growing up that came from old Broad Lane. Oh, me uncle's fame was far and wide when he was 17, for pitch and toss and pigeon lofts his kind was seldom seen. Me aunt, she was a dealer, to the cold case she laid claim, spent all her life 100 yards from a place they call Broad Lane. But when people try to settle down, sometimes they have to move. It's called the march of progress, and it changes all the rules. A whole new life, it must be made, but it's hard to break the chain. And 1,000 memories still live on of a place they call Broad Lane. In Patrick Street you can hear the trams travel through the rain, as Father Matthew's statue try to help us to abstain. But the greatest joy in being alive, I heard me mother say, was the happy sound of growing up that came from old Broad Lane. Yes, in Patrick Street you can hear the trams travel through the rain, as Father Matthew's statue try to help us to abstain. But the greatest joy in being alive, I heard me mother say, was the happy sound of growing up that came from old Broad Lane. Yes, the happy sound of growing up that came from old Broad Lane.